Hello and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Symposium. It's Friday, July 18th, which is Nelson Mandela Day. And as always, when I pre-record, even by a few hours, since the world is changing so rapidly, I want you to know that this is being pre-recorded a few hours before it goes live at 7 p.m. I'm very happy to have Scott Ritter with me today to discuss various matters in the world, including a project that he's working on. Now, given that it is Nelson Mandela Day, I just wanted to bring up something that I was actually a little bit surprised by, which was the optimism of the former South African Foreign Minister, Naledi Pandor, who expressed her optimism in the global north in terms of what was done with the apartheid regime in South Africa. And I can report that the LaRouche organization, there's going to be a conference at the UN July 28th and 29th on the question of a two-state solution economic development plan. We've written a leaflet for this here, which itemizes some of the things, because people say, oh, well, the UN General Assembly, they can't do anything, it's powerless. You've got the US veto, etc. But in 1974, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly not even to seat the all-white South African delegation. They rejected their credentials. They also passed a resolution earlier against South Africa, demanding that everyone should boycott them, block their ports, not send weapons. On November 4th, 1977, the UN Security Council, interesting, voted up a resolution which made mandatory for all member states an arms embargo against South Africa. So this was a remarkable mobilization of the world, which we have yet to see. But I think the more delusional and arrogant the policies of the West become, I think we are moving towards that. So I'm going to just stop with that, because Scott, I wanted to bring you on. I'm sure you have some thoughts already from what I've said, and you may have thoughts on Nelson Mandela Day. So please go ahead.
Well, I mean, Nelson Mandela was, one of the great leaders of the world. Somebody who definitely went through some of the most horrific trials and tribulations, and emerged from it with his morality intact, with possessing a clarity that wasn't fueled by revenge, that was fueled by, moving forward and seeking the best outcome for all of his people. And as the president of South Africa, that meant not just the blacks, but the whites and the browns and everybody. And it would be something else if we could bottle what made Nelson Mandela the man that he was, and sell it or give it to the combined leadership of the world today. I think the world would be a far better place if we took a page from Nelson Mandela's repertoire of diplomacy and statesmanship and leadership, and acted accordingly. We certainly wouldn't be where we are today when it comes to the problems in the Middle East and in Europe and around the world.
I think that's really right. I think this conference they just had in Bogota was of interest. I mean, it seems to me to indicate motion in that direction, where a group of 30 nations came together. You might say not the super big ones, but I think Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia, you may have more on that, and declared we've got to do an arms embargo. We don't want to sit by idly while this horrible genocide is ongoing. I think there is a bit of a shift occurring. Do you have a take on that?
Well, I mean, it's a start. Every journey starts with the first step, and Brazil, South Africa, and Indonesia most certainly aren't insignificant nations. No nation is insignificant when it comes to doing the morally correct thing. And the 30 nations that came together, that's a start. That's the first brick, in the on the path that needs to be trod by everybody. So, you know, now we need the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. I think it's important for people to take note that you can't rest laurels. And just because they had a nice meeting in Bogota involving 30 nations, we don't simply just write articles about that, do video podcasts about it, and then move on, because then they might as well not have had the meeting. You know, there needs to be the next step. This needs to be, you know, that meeting in Bogota needs to be the springboard for the next meeting and the next meeting. And if people get frustrated because they say, well, what's that next meeting going to do? Is it going to solve all the problems? Of course not. Of course not. But what it does is it keeps the issue alive, and it moves us that much further down the road. To resolve the issue of Israel, Palestine today, it's going to be a long, very tenuous and oftentimes tedious journey, fraught with danger and complexities. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just keep moving forward, even though you know you're not at the you don't get to the top of Mount Everest by springboarding there. You go one step at a time, and according to the people that have made that journey, each step is hell. But they made it, and then they came down, and successful mission. It's the same. No, I'm just again. I think the 30 nations that came together is a good start, a great start. But we just need to keep the journey going forward. And the other thing is, journeys don't happen by sitting on your couch and watching other people take the step. People have to start, you know, taking ownership of this journey, taking responsibility. Don't wait for other people to do it for you. If you're frustrated with the pace of things, if you're frustrated with things not getting done, then get up and do it yourself, and find other people to work with you. There's a lot of people out there that want to get things done. Sometimes what's needed is a push, some leadership, some motivation. And I would just encourage people to stop being so negative, although there's a lot to be negative about, and start focusing on what needs to be done to get the job done, and stop waiting for other people to do things. If somebody is doing something and you don't have a better way of doing it, then help them, join them, work with them. But sitting there cheerleading on doesn't accomplish a damn thing.
Right. And today, the Nelson Mandela Foundation says that everybody should take an hour to do something for someone other than yourself or less fortunate. And even though this is 7 p.m., if you haven't done that for an hour yet, you should do it now or do it tomorrow. On the Israel question, what is going on right now? What is this attack on Syria, the Druze situation? What does Netanyahu think he's going to gain by this?
I mean, Syria is chaos personified. It's no longer a functioning nation state. I just remind all those people who cheered the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, this is what you got. And if you consider yourself to be pro-Syrian, there's nothing about what's happening today in Syria that is beneficial to the Syrian cause, the Syrian people, the Syrian nation. This is the end of Syria. And, this is what happens when you start tinkering with your regime change in a vacuum. Iraq should have served as a lesson to all of the regime change proponents. Libya is another lesson. That you don't build nations by getting rid of leaders you disagree with. Saddam Hussein, for whatever you thought of him, was the glue that held Iraq together. Muammar Gaddafi, whatever you thought of him, was the glue that held Libya together. And Bashar al-Assad, whatever you thought of him, was the glue that held Syria together. And getting rid of these three nations, especially since the powers that achieved regime change weren't internal forces, but rather external forces imposing, their vision of how these nations should be on people that didn't share that vision, weren't even aware of that vision in many cases, and vehemently opposed that vision. So this is where we're at. Israel is in a very difficult situation. Not that I bemoan their difficulties. the more difficult, the better for Israel, except that tragically, Israel ends up thrashing out at the people and nations around them, and they pay the consequences. But, Israel, viewed the downfall of Bashar al-Assad as the beginning of the end of the axis of resistance, the Iranian motivated and led collaboration between the Hezbollah in Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Syria, pro-Shia militias in Iraq, Iran, Yemen. And this axis of resistance, and can't leave out Hamas in Gaza either, posed a threat to Israel, and Israel has been, seeking to achieve their defeat. And when Syria collapsed, it was part of a decades-long effort by the United States, Great Britain, Turkey, Syria, Gulf Arab states to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. And from the Israeli perspective, this broke the link, the physical connectivity between Iran and Hezbollah, and this was seen as an opportunity to strangle Hezbollah. But you all you did in getting rid of Bashar al-Assad is create a sea of chaos and anarchy, and what we're seeing is a manifestation of that. Anybody who thought that you could take Jolani, a literal head cutter from ISIS, Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, HTS, whatever you want to call his group. It's an Islamic-based terrorist entity, and you can put a suit on him, and suddenly he becomes civilized. You don't know what you're talking about. The man is a terrorist. He will always be a terrorist. He is the worst kind of terrorist, an Islamic terrorist who perverts the cause of Islam through the crimes that he commits. And he is supported by tens of thousands of like-minded individuals who have no problem with slaughtering men, women, and children. And what we're seeing in Syria right now is a manifestation of this, where Jolani's head-chopping terrorist cohorts have turned their sights on the Druze minority of Syria. The Druze are supported by Israel. There's a significant Druze population that is in Israel and also in the Golan Heights. Israel is very.
Some of them are in the IDF. Is that not true as well? Are there Druze soldiers?
Yes, the Druze who serve, the Druze who are Israeli citizens, and as I said, there's a significant population of them serve in the IDF. And so Israel is coming to the assistance of the Druze, and this is what we see now. It's an interesting situation where the United States is being critical of Israel's actions. That's sort of a rarity, but again, they're being critical of Israel's actions in responding to the acts of Islamic terrorists who the United States has allegedly been in a war for over 2 decades to suppress. And yet we took a $10 million bounty off the head of the lead terrorist in Syria and suddenly shake his hand as the president, say he's a good man with an interesting experience. He's a tough guy. You're not a tough guy when you behead people who have their hands shackled behind their backs. There's nothing tough about that. That's cowardism personified.
Also, finally, our ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, raised the question about the beating to death of a U.S. citizen in the West Bank. This something that not much has been said about, and this is not the first American that the Israelis have killed either. Do you think this will go anywhere?
Left in a vacuum, no, but we're starting to see is a recognition on the part of the United States, the Trump administration, and Mike Huckabee, that Israel is not a nation that is conducive to American values. Huckabee is also talking about calling out Israel as a nation hostile to Christians because they have blocked Christian pilgrims from the United States or Christian groups from visiting Israel. I think the reality is, the sugar coating of this bitter pill called Israel has been washed off by the blood of the Palestinians and others, and the Americans are starting to realize just how distasteful the reality of Israel is.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to see in an email letter I get from, I think it's Jewish Insider, a lot of the most hardcore Zionist congressmen are not meeting their fundraising objectives. I think there is a real turn against this everywhere. I mean, you hear it from Tucker Carlson, you hear it from the MAGA base, that people don't want to be supporting this. And I think some of the veneer is coming off. But I was particularly happy to see that these people are having trouble with their fundraising.
That would be, the money is the root of all evil in politics. And the only way you clean up American politics is to take the money out of it. And if you want to clean up the pro-Zionist, aspects of American politics, it's one thing. Yes, you have to continue to confront them intellectually to show the vacuous reality of their ideas. But then you also need to follow up by starving them of the resources they need to continue. And it appears that the anti-Zionist voices are not only starting to resonate broadly amongst the American public, but the American public starting to take the appropriate action, which is deny the money. If you deny the money, they will wilt away and blow away.
Hopefully soon. Now, I wanted to pull up this map because we've just had the unprovoked illegal bombing of Iran. We have this very kind of nasty, festering situation with Azerbaijan. And of course, this is the north-south transport corridor, which has just begun working. I know Putin has referenced it a number of times, and I do think the ultimate target is Putin. Also, I just read yesterday 2 top AIPAC people were in Azerbaijan in December of 2024. I'm sure what they were doing there was not very nice, but do you think this has anything to do with what's happening lately in terms of exacerbating various situations as to disrupt this potential corridor?
Well, we know, I think in 2019, RAND Corporation, and just so people know that RAND Corporation is a think tank with deep governmental ties to the U.S. military and to intelligence services. When RAND Corporation publishes a major study or something of that nature, it's not done in a vacuum, meaning that the intellectuals at RAND didn't get around the table and say, "Hey guys, where in the world do you want to study today? Scott, would you like to do a deep dive on the South Caucasus?" No. What happens is the CIA, State Department, and others are saying we need to find ways to disrupt Russia, and we want to look at the different geographical hot points around Russia. Hey, Rand, could you do something on South Caucasus, or could you do a deeper dive into this? And Rand did. And the South Caucasus is one of the areas that Rand Corporation identified as being particularly vulnerable to outside intervention designed to create chaos and disruption, designed to weaken Russia's influence in the region and weaken Russia as a whole, to be disruptive to projects like the North-South economic corridor. So Rand Corporation in 2019 has written something up that then makes its way into policymakers, who then begin to discuss it, and they'll use that as a foundation upon which they begin to formulate U.S. government policies, and also by extension this whole, and we've just now recently, people are waking up to the role played by so-called non-governmental organizations, or these quasi-governmental fronts like USAID, and how they front the National Endowment for Democracy, and how it fronts various entities and all this. It's all designed for regime change and for disruption, regional disruption. It's not meant for development and promoting democracy. And the U.S. government has, for the last 6 years, been working on creating disruption in the South Caucasus. We've seen that in the Republic of Georgia. We've seen that in Armenia, and we are seeing it in Azerbaijan today. And so there's no doubt what's going on in that region. I mean, to have AIPAC members in Azerbaijan, I think is, to discuss a couple of things. One, the continued flow of Azerbaijani energy to Israel through Turkey, And so getting the Azeris to do that. Two, Azerbaijan has served as a base for Israeli and American intelligence operations against Iran. And three, Israel promotes itself as a regional technology hub, business hub, economic hub, uh, energy hub. And a key aspect of that is to find markets. And Turkey, Azerbaijan we have the Russian north-south corridor, but Turkey envisions a new Silk Road that provides connectivity from Turkey through Azerbaijan into Central Asia, where there are significant Turkic populations that extend all throughout Central Asia into China, and Turkey has this sort of pan-Ottoman type approach that they're going to resurrect. A caliphate-like structure with Turkey at the head of it, similar to what the Ottomans were doing in the past. To make that corridor work, though, you have to have connectivity from Turkey to Azerbaijan, which is done directly through the Nakhchivan exclave. But Nakhchivan is an exclave; it's not connected to the Azeri mainland, so you need a corridor. It's called the Zangezur corridor in southern Armenia, and the Azeris and the Turks are doing their best to facilitate their access to such a corridor. And Israel is there, I think, to help ensure that to happen, because that's part of Israel's grand design. So there's nothing innocent about Israeli involvement in Azerbaijan, and it all is done by the United States, by Europe, by Israel, and others to be disruptive to Russian and Iranian ambitions of coming together and creating their own economic opportunity for Russia to be able to bypass sea lines of communication and take them through Western controlled choke points like the Suez Canal, or you have to go around the Horn of Africa, or you have to do even the longer one around the Pacific, to be able to come straight from St. Petersburg all the way down and come to an Iranian port and then be able to jump straight over to India is a godsend. The Chinese just recently opened up a rail line connecting Western China with Azerbaijan. So these are interior lines of communications for organizations like BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, et cetera. And it's in the interests of the United States and others to be disruptive to it. So I think what you're seeing taking place today in regards to Azerbaijan, Armenia, to a lesser extent Georgia, because they seem to have been able to successfully stand up to the pressures that were put on by the Europe and the United States. But now the new front is Armenia, Azerbaijan, and how that can be used to be disruptive to Russia and Iran.
Yeah, and speaking of that, we're moving to the delusional quality of the West and the power of the BRICS. And by the way, I think that all of this is probably why apparently in March the British embassy brought in a defense attaché for the first time ever in history. So now they have a defense, whatever that means, defense intelligence, something or other, in their embassy in Azerbaijan. But this you spoke of yesterday, and I think it begins to get us to the delusional quality of some of our Western leaders. The tweet from Lindsey Graham regarding the 50-day announcement from President Trump, and saying that equally important was his statement that if the fighting had not ended in 50 days, he would impose up to 100% tariffs on the countries buying cheap Russian oil, propping up Putin's war machine, hitting Putin where it hurts the most. If Putin and others are wondering what happens on day 51, I would suggest they call the Ayatollah. If I were a country buying cheap Russian oil, propping up Putin's war machine, I would take President Trump at his word. Now, so far, I don't think Russia has been terribly hurt by all of these things that we've been doing. Not that they don't have an effect, but your thoughts on this?
Well, 50 days is an odd number. What is the purpose of 50 days? To give Russia a chance to reconsider its successful military operation, for Russia to sit down and look at the state of its successful economy, for Russia to reevaluate the successful diplomacy it has with China, India, Brazil, and other nations. The 50 days isn't about Russia. I mean, this is all window dressing. Lindsey Graham has been played like a fool by this president, I believe, because he believes that he has given the president a tool. But I believe the president will never use this tool because the president knows that this tool, the sanction tool, will blow up in his face. The Chinese have already said, bring it on. We don't care. We're doubling down on Russia. We're all in. Brazil has said, if you don't want to trade with us, then we don't trade with you. We don't care. And India is only a point, there comes a point when India is going to realize it can't straddle the fence forever and will have to jump over to one side. And the side that continues to open up its arms, provide cheap energy and, predictable, consistent business relations is probably the side you should run with, not the side that sanctions you all the time, threatens you, cajoles you. What does India get from its relationship with the United States? Nothing. So I think this is the reality. This 50 days is for President Trump to come up with a new policy. I think what it does is it provides a pause where he can shut up the Keith Kellogg's, he can shut up the Marco Rubios, he can shut everybody up and say silence. We have 50 days now, and we need to come up with a policy. And we're not talking about Lindsey Graham's 51st day fantasy here. We're talking about what really is going to be accomplished. And I think one of the reasons why 50 days is out there is that I think the reality on the ground will be far different in 50 days than it is now. I mean, right now it's a completely unfavorable situation for Ukraine. I believe after 50 days of continuous Russian bombardment and advances and such, the reality on the ground will almost dictate the outcome itself. And I think this is what the president's looking for. He's looking for an opportunity to find a path forward, but he needed to stop the noise around him. He needed to silence the Lindsey Grahams, and he needed to shut NATO up. He needed to shut everybody up. He turned around to NATO and created this non-existent arms deal. But that he could say, there, I did it. I'm done. 50 days, we're on pause. And I think at the end of 50 days, hopefully we're going to see a different approach by the United States, because the policy of sanctioning tariffs and all that, this isn't going to work, and the president has to know it's not going to work.
I mean, it does see the U.S. is 340 million people or so, these nations. And I think already the Chinese foreign minister gave a briefing yesterday or the day before saying exactly what you said. We're all in. Russia's now announcing publicly they're reviving the Russia, India, China cooperation, which was the seed crystal. The only people that will end up being hurt from this foolishness is us, actually. I mean, they have 5 billion people or whatever that they can be trading with. We're here with an increasingly shrinking, bankrupt, ridiculous economy. We can't even produce. I heard a figure, maybe you can tell me if this is accurate, that in 1 month, I think it's in 1 month or 3 months, somehow that Russia was capable in a year to produce about 36 times the ammunition of all of NATO combined. And I forget, it was triple the amount in a 3-month period or something like that.
Yeah, no, the bottom line is Russia's defense industry is fully functional. And the irony for the West is it's not on a full war footing. I mean, Russia's kicking our butt simply by maximizing peacetime potential. But Russia still has a vibrant civilian economy as well. They haven't gone completely over into a war economy. And they're just crushing the West across the board, crushing us.
They're also doing massive reconstruction in the new oblasts, aren't they? I've heard something like 20,000 new buildings, and I forget, Lugansk or somewhere or other.
Yeah, I mean, some areas get, of course, there is massive reconstruction taking place. Russia has done an interesting, path here, taken an interesting path where different regions, you get like a sister city. So, for instance, Mariupol, I think St. Petersburg has Mariupol.
Oh, wow.
And you see tremendous strides. I mean, I was in Mariupol in early 2024, And when I take a look at the photographs that are coming out of Mariupol today, it's even the transformation's just stunning. And you see similar things in Lugansk. There's other sister city relationships and such. And they are moving forward. I mean, it's frustrating, for instance, in Lugansk, it's still very much a war zone. And the Ukrainians have recently started using drone attacks to destroy civilian targets, including infrastructure that's been, that's been reconstructed. So it's sort of a, 2 steps forward, 1 step back for the Russians right now. But the point is, the Russians aren't just sitting there doing nothing. As they reclaim their territory, they begin the process of bringing Russians up to Russian standards, to fully incorporate them into the Russian Federation, from an infrastructure standpoint and quality of life standpoint. And, this is something that a lot of people don't forget. The Russian war effort is so much greater than simply mobilizing troops for the front line. It is about, frankly speaking, redefining Russian society. Vladimir Putin has said that, the future leaders of Russia will be people who served in the special military operation, either in a military capacity or in a governing capacity, a civil capacity. But the bottom line is the furnace that is producing the next generation of Russian leaders, is the special military operation.
So you're working on this 38 minutes documentary, which I think is really important. I just came back from a conference in Berlin, which was very interesting. There were a number of German and actually an East German industrial association that participated because Germany has gone mad, as you know. I think it was the defense minister, Boris Pistorius, who said that now we can get on with killing Russians or something. We made a mistake in World War II. What was that? What the heck was he talking about? As if people didn't think it was the right thing to defeat the Nazi regime. And then we had earlier, Tucker Carlson, I think, reported last year when it was around when Biden decided to send the long-range missiles, that people at the Pentagon thought there was a 50% possibility of a nuclear response or a nuclear war, and they considered that acceptable. And then Admiral Buchanan, who said at CSIS that after a nuclear war, we had to make sure we had enough weapons left to still be the hegemon, as if somebody wins a nuclear war. And I guess Starmer and Merz were just meeting yesterday to discuss their various kinds of military cooperation. And now France and Germany are talking about their nuclear cooperation. So Helga's point was punctum saliens. We're getting to a point where it's one way or the other of no return, and that definitely people, I don't think, are as clear on this question as they ought to be, particularly in the West. So maybe, why don't you just go ahead and say what you're working on and why?
Well, I've been working on promoting nuclear disarmament between the United States and Russia my entire adult life. If anybody doesn't know, I was literally the first U.S. inspector on the ground in the Soviet Union back in July of 1988 to implement the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which is a landmark arms control agreement signed by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev in December of 1987. The treaty came into force on the 1 July 1988, and I had been in the Soviet Union in the city of Votkinsk 2 weeks prior to that as part of the advance team in there to try and make sure everything worked the way it was supposed to work on day one. So when the sun rose on July 1st, and other inspectors were waking up in Germany to board aircraft to fly to the Soviet Union to begin their work, myself and the 3 other inspectors were the first inspectors. Something I'm pretty proud of. Serendipitous. I didn't really do anything other than be in the right place at the right time, but it's pretty cool. But ever since then, I've been an advocate of arms control and nuclear disarmament. And today what we see is this the momentum that we had started back in 1988 and continued through the START treaty, START 1, 2, and 3, has stalled. We have one remaining arms control relationship, treaty-based relationship with Russia, and that's New START treaty. The INF treaty is over, finished. Other arms control agreements are likewise finished, and the New START treaty might as well be dead because there's no inspections. It's on a moratorium based upon America's behavior towards Russia. And this treaty expires in February of 2026. That's less than a year from now, a little bit more than a half year from now. And when it expires, we have the United States and Russia ready to springboard into a new nuclear arms race. The United States is talking about a complete modernization of its strategic nuclear forces, replacing the Minuteman III.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, the United States is ready to, embark in this, multi-trillion-dollar modernization program of the Sentinel ground-based missile. We're talking about new submarines, new missiles. We're talking about new bombers, the B-21, a new triad. And then, once this treaty expires, we'll go from having a cap on 1,550 deployed systems. We're almost overnight, we'll get that up to around 4,500, and we'll probably be boosting it up to around the 12,000 mark. I mean, this is insanity. We're going to be deploying intermediate range missiles once again into Europe. This has prompted Russia to say that they will no longer respect the moratorium they had self-imposed on themselves. They will be deploying modern systems like the Oreshnik and others. It's just a recipe for disaster. The reason why the INF treaty was so important is that we had a situation in Europe where intermediate range missiles possessed by both the United States and the Soviet Union threatened each other to such a degree that each side was ready to launch preemptive strikes or operate on a hair trigger. I always tell people that if we hadn't done the INF treaty, none of us would be alive today because we'd be dead through some mistake, some accident. But humanity was able to get a lease on life by getting rid of these weapon systems. And now we're getting ready to deploy them again as if, people have forgotten why we got rid of them to begin with. The world isn't different. The same problems exist. In fact, it's become even more dangerous. The tripwire will be even more sensitive. And now it'll be attached to a nuclear arms race that, with strategic weaponry, and we're headed down a highway to hell. And so I wrote a book to talk about this very problem called Highway to Hell. And the book lays out in very stark detail the danger that's posed by all of these weapons. But as I've said before, if you're going to shout that there's a problem, then you probably want to come up with a solution. Last year, I initiated something called Operation Dawn. And Operation Dawn was an effort to mobilize the American public opinion to make sure that in the presidential race, the issue of arms control, the issue of preventing nuclear war, was present. And we were very successful because of the work that we did. And this couldn't have been done without the support of everybody, including yourself, Diane. The work that in the LaRouche organization as well, very supportive. The work that we did, got an op-ed piece published in The Hill written by Donald Trump Jr. and RFK Jr. These were two people close to Donald Trump. It wouldn't have been published without the approval of Donald Trump. And so it was the only time any one of the major candidates, made a position statement about where they stood on, bringing the conflict in Ukraine to an end and preventing a nuclear war with Russia. This op-ed came out right at the time when Joe Biden was getting ready to sign an agreement with Keir Starmer that would allow the Ukrainians to use U.S.-provided ATACMS missile to their maximum range. That is, to give them the ability to launch 300-plus kilometers into Russia, striking strategic targets. And the Russians had just promulgated a nuclear doctrine that said, if you do this, we will be responding with nuclear weapons, or at least have the right to. People thought that maybe the Russians were bluffing. They weren't. On September 13th, the day that Biden and Starmer were supposed to meet in the White House and sign this document, Anatoly Antonov had made a phone call to American officials, basically that if this decision goes forward and Russia is struck, the Russian retaliation will not be limited to Europe, but will include Washington, D.C. I'll say that again, just so people understand. The Russian retaliation would not be limited to Europe. It would include Washington, D.C. We'd all be dead because that's a nuclear war. Fortunately, Biden got the message and they didn't sign that document. But later on into November, the Biden administration had made a decision that they needed to push this issue forward. And this is where you were talking about Rear Admiral Buchanan, the director of plans for Strategic Command in a presentation made at a Washington, D.C. think tank, basically said, we're ready to hook and jab with the Russians, right? We're ready to have nuclear exchange with Russia. We're ready to do this and we will win. That's their feeling. They will win. I thought this was just posturing. But again, part of Operation Dawn was to take this issue forward and see if we could get some changes. At the time, the Biden administration was ready and had signed off on long-range strike. It was going to happen. And the Russians were saying, if you think we're bluffing, we're not. One of the things I did is go to Congress, and I met with a very senior Democratic congressman. And I said, you're one of those people in the know, without giving away national secrets. Do we think the Russians are bluffing? And he said, no, it's the opposite. The CIA came in and briefed us and said that the Russians aren't bluffing. And he said that wasn't the scariest part of the briefing. The scariest part of the briefing was that the Biden administration people in the briefing at the highest levels said, that's okay. We're ready to have a nuclear war with Russia over this issue. Ladies and gentlemen, that's November of last year. The Biden administration was ready to have a nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine. And what we were able to do with Operation Dawn is take it a step further and get pressure placed. We couldn't get pressure on the Biden administration. That was one of our goals. But we were able to open the door to the Trump administration. And the idea was if Trump could issue a statement that said, if I'm president, I won't continue this policy. He provides a window of hope for the Russians, and maybe the Russians won't, implement their nuclear doctrine. And sure enough, Donald Trump did just that. And the Russians read those words and said, okay, we're not going to implement our nuclear doctrine. And we were that close. We escaped it. We didn't. The reason why I bring this up is that a lot of times, I remember starting Operation Dawn, the pushback I got. Come on, Scott, you're just one guy. What can you do? What do you really think they're going to listen to you? Do you really think you're going to have, the ability to make a change? And I say, I said, you won't know unless you try, unless you take that journey. And I'm here to tell you right now, I believe that Operation Dawn contributed significantly to preventing a nuclear war last fall, early winter. Operation Dawn. And so what we're at today, facing today, is a new problem. If this treaty, this New START treaty, goes away in February, we're going to have an arms race that's going to lead to a nuclear war. It's literally, we're on the highway to hell. You're welcome to read my book about it, but that alone, reading my book, isn't going to solve any problems. It'll empower you with knowledge and information, but the question is what to do. And Project 38 is what I plan on doing. Project 38, the 38 comes from 38 minutes of terror felt by the citizens of Hawaii, the state of Hawaii, in January 13th, 2018, when at 8 o'clock in the morning, they received an emergency broadcast notification on their cell phones that said, a missile is inbound to Hawaii. Seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill. And for 38 minutes, the citizens of Hawaii thought they were going to die. And there's just people after people. You see the interviews of people calling their loved ones. You see the videotape of people running the street, not knowing where to go because there's nowhere to go. Jim Carrey, the comedian and actor, talks about how he was in Maui. He sat on the beach. His producer called up and said, "Do you want to meet? We're going to be dead in 10 minutes." And he said, "No, I don't want to go out that way. I'm just going to sit on the beach and wait for it and think good thoughts." But the bottom line is people thought they were going to die. Everything they were working for was going to be over in 38 minutes. And so what Project 38 is trying to do is we're going to make a documentary film about this. But it's not just about that, but what they're about to do about it. Because I asked two questions in this film. The first question is, if you were there in Hawaii, or if you're wherever you are today, and you get that announcement that a missile's inbound. You can't stop it. You're going to die. And everything you love, cherish, work for will disappear. If you could go back in time 6 months, what would you do to prevent that missile from being launched? Knowing that if you don't prevent it, it's going to be launched and you're going to die. What would you be willing to do to prevent that missile from being launched? The next question I ask is, why aren't you doing that now? On February 26th, the New START Treaty expires. And then we are literally on a rush towards death. What are you willing to do? What I'm willing to do is produce a documentary film, 38 minutes, and then use that as a foundation of a project to bring this issue to the attention of the President of the United States. Now, people say, Scott, I just told you Operation Dawn helped prevent a nuclear war last year. Well, Project 38, I hope, can prevent a nuclear war this year. We have to get the New START Treaty extended. Mandatory must thing. It has to happen. If it doesn't, we're in trouble. Project 38 is designed to create public awareness of this issue and use as a springboard to the United States Congress and other influential decision makers. We'll be building what I call a Team B. If you've studied American intelligence history, you know that Team B is something that came up during the Ford administration, where people were challenging the CIA's national intelligence estimate about Soviet missile production rates. At that time, Team B were people who were, trying to promote, anti-Soviet beliefs. This is a new Team B. We're going to challenge the Trump administration's posturing about arms control, et cetera. We are assembling a group of people, all of whom have served at the highest levels in government, in positions directly related to this topic: arms control, nuclear war, et cetera. What we want is 38 minutes with the president, 38 minutes to brief the president. But if we don't get that 38 minutes with him, then we'll speak to his administration. If we can't speak to them, we'll speak to Congress. If we can't speak to them, we'll speak to Washington, D.C. insiders. But we're going to speak for 38 minutes about the most important issue of our time, trying to stop nuclear war. Because nothing else matters. I keep telling people all this. You could talk about any issue you want. If there's a nuclear war between the United States and Russia, nothing else matters. This should be your top priority. That doesn't mean you can't walk and chew gum at the same time and work on other things. But if you aren't talking about trying to stop a nuclear war, then you might as well not talk about anything, because nothing else matters. So the Project 38 is an effort to do just this. I asked myself the question, if I could go back in time 6 months, what would I be willing to do to stop a nuclear war? And the answer is Project 38. Why aren't I doing it now? I am. The question is, why aren't you doing it now? Tomorrow, on Saturday, I got a fundraiser. It'll be the first of several.
Tomorrow.
This project does.
It is tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know if we weren't supposed to use times or anything like that.
That's fine. Yes.
So I was trying to be sensitive to that. But tomorrow, there's a fundraiser here. It's the first of what will be several fundraisers. This is an ambitious project. And ambitious projects come with, prodigious expenses. Making a movie ain't cheap. Carrying out this kind of, one of the goals in the end is to do a public presentation at the National Press Club, similar to what we did with Operation Dawn. But that ain't free. It needs money. Bringing people of the talent, the level of talent that we're talking about together, requires, the ability to pay for travel, pay for hotels, pay for food. It doesn't happen for free. So, we're going to start a fundraiser. All I would say is that for the people that have enjoyed your life since December of last year, that's probably because of the generous support you gave to Operation Dawn. If you want to enjoy life going forward, you might want to consider providing similar support to Project 38.
Great. When will the film be done? I saw the trailer, which is excellent.
Well, the goal is to have the film done by the end of September. Again, it's funding contingent, right. I can only do what the budget enables me to do. But the goal right now is to generate enough funding so that by the end of September, we're not talking about an hour and a half documentary. It's Project 38. It's a 38-minute film. All right. So but it's still it's 38 minutes that will be informative and have a message, and there will be, a narrative, etc. And again, getting the talent pulled together to pull this off. Yeah, there's a lot of people who contribute their time, but movies don't happen because people drop everything. If you're going to ask a filmmaker to do it, you have to compensate the filmmaker. If you can ask a writer, because even though I consider myself a writer, writing books and articles is completely different than writing for film. Right. So we need a writer who knows how to capture my ideas and turn it into 38 minutes of hard punching narrative, and then we have to do it. You have to physically go and interview people and such. But I believe if I can generate the funds, that I'll be able to have a finished product by the end of September, and then we begin the campaign. Remember, Project 38 isn't just a movie. The movie is 38 minutes. Project 38 is the campaign, and that's taking the message to Washington, D.C. And you don't want to just show up in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club in a vacuum. You want to build up the pressure and begin to get people lined up and get people, so that when we come together in Washington, D.C., there's cooperating, but there'll be an atmosphere of expectation. And as I said, we're not asking the impossible here. We're literally asking for the United States to extend New START treaty. That's all I'm asking. That's all everybody should be asking. Because if we can extend it, then we can prevent this arms race and buy ourselves time for the negotiators to do their magic.
Right. Well, that's excellent. I want to thank you for being here. I will say that for my part, I want to absolutely make sure that we get this threat of nuclear war off the table and get these treaties going. Somehow mankind has got to get beyond this. We should not be in this mess every so often. So I think we have to make sure we're alive. And then we have to change our entire conception about how people relate to one another, the relationships among nations. We are really very primitive. And I'm hoping you mentioned your thoughts at the beginning on Nelson Mandela. His outlook has to become what actually shapes human relations, and not this crazy totem pole who's on top hierarchical nonsense where you always have to find an enemy. I mean, I keep saying, why we could have chosen Canada or Brazil, or why did we choose Russia, China? I mean, I know there's certain geopolitical reasons and who has to be the superior whatever, but we're not superior in much of anything at the moment, so that doesn't seem to have worked terribly well.
No, but we shouldn't be thinking in terms of superiority and supremacy and exceptionalism. We should be thinking in terms of equality and sovereignty, and doing the right thing. I was raised as a kid with the golden rule: do unto others as you want done unto you. And I would say that's probably a good way to go forward in life. Treat others as you want to be treated, and suddenly you find that maybe the world's a better place to live in.
Yes, and I think that's actually American, at least according to John Quincy Adams. That's the idea. So thank you very much for being with me, and I hope some people will be there tomorrow. I sent the invitation to your fundraiser to my whole list in the area, and we'll collaborate.
Okay, well, thank you very much.